Okay. Good morning, everyone. You can all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. It's Monday morning. I'm happy to see at least half of the room full. You are the brave ones, right? Yeah, thank you for inviting me. For those who have been in my class a few weeks ago, there will be a little bit of overlap. Sorry for that. But for the others, welcome and thank you for coming to see the work of our studio. So, our studio is founded, called Unfold, founded in 2002 by my partner Claire Wanier and myself. We are based in Antwerp, Belgium, which I think for most of you is kind of clear where that is. So Unfold takes its name from the first project that Claire and I did together in 2002, in which we made body scans of our bodies and cut out parts of those scans, part of the data, and unfolded them using computer programs into flat patterns, which we then cut using CNC methods or just by hand out of different materials like porcelain, silver and leather, and then we refolded them into some kind of low polygon approximations of our own bodies. So we call these projects written on the surface. So it's literally taking that 3D data and recreating it into physical models that are a copy of the body and that are super personal kind of jewelry. What it shows is that we have a fascination for the digital medium, but we kind of refuse the screen as the place for the digital to manifest itself on. We've always liked the digital because it's very malleable, it's in flux, it moves, you can reprogram it, you can change it. But we also like physical materials. We like the history of ceramics, we like the smell of wood when you cut it, we like the weight of metal. So if you look up to unfold in the English dictionary, it literally means to open or spread out from a folded position, so like a newspaper that you open up. But the second definition is to be revealed gradually to the understanding, a story that slowly develops, that slowly unfolds. And for us, the second meaning over the last 10, 15 years became more important because a lot of our work are autonomous installations that build on top of each other and all together they tell a story. So if you look on our website, you will see mostly this kind of autonomous projects, and today I want to talk a little bit about how some of these interconnect. In very short, I think if you look at our recent work, it is born out of an interest of the history of making, from craftsmanship over the industrial age, and how that projects into the future where it intersects with mostly digital tools and technologies like the internet, open source networks, communities, digital manufacturing and 3D printing. And so a lot of our projects interrogate or investigate how that future will look like and what are the implications of things like 3D printing, for example, on our profession of designers. So for example, I think the one project that shows this the clearest is a kiosk, in which we visualized a near future scenario in which 3D printing becomes so cheap and accessible that you will see it on the corner of every street like a New York hot dog stall. So what happens if manufacturing, if the making of things goes from the factory to the street? What if production becomes digital and you will buy your products on shops, on like an iTunes of products? Then you of course also get the Pirate Bay of products where you can illegally download copies of all the products. You can appropriate them like we see today. You're all born with YouTube and with the digital medium, and you're all accustomed to how media is being copied but also appropriated. So everyone is kind of creating memes and creating interpretations and creative copies of popular works and of media. What happens if design, if the manufacturing of goods will go through a same transition and we will all start to hack and to modify kind of design objects? So that is one. Other projects deal with tools. What are the tools for interacting with the digital medium? I'll briefly show the video for this. This is a project called Of Instruments and Archetypes, where we look at computer interfaces and customizing in design. So there's a lot of discussion now about customizing in design. You can order a custom pair of Nikes where you tweak the colors and the shapes maybe and the patterns, but you're always kind of clicking buttons and dragging sliders. What if this customization, what if only the digital object exists on the screen, where you need this flexibility and the interface to the object is broken out of that screen and becomes physical tools. So it's a set of measuring instruments that wirelessly, digitally connect with a 3D model, and you can measure existing objects, and the 3D design adapts to the physical real world objects, and you get a 3D printed part that perfectly combines the object into a new functional object. Probably our most famous project is Live Design Electronique from 2010 already, and which is, in short, like, it's a very simple description, but a 21st century take on a traditional pottery studio. So on one side of the installation is a digital pottery wheel. So on the screen there's a cylinder rotating. When you move your hand in front of the screen, you cross a laser beam, and the profile from the laser that is projected on your hand is copied on the screen, and you can literally push your hand in the digital matter and start shaping an object. There's a save and a reset button. With the save button, your design is saved in our database, and we have today about more than 500,000 of these objects from all over the world. And what we do with these objects is, on the other side of the installation is a ceramic 3D printer. So it's a machine that we started developing in 2009, that instead of printing with plastics, it prints with soft clay. And those in my class have all touched the clay and struggled with the clay and fought with the clay, I think. But it works by extruding the soft clay and building an object layer by layer. I think today, in 2010, nobody's seen 3D printing. I think today you all know how it works, but the platform lowers and you draw layer by layer the objects. So we take these files, we select the ones that are interesting and printable, and then we print them out and fire them and show them again in the gallery. We call these installations kind of snapshots of the research that we do in the studio. So when I say it's like a 21st century take on a traditional pottery studio, that's like the very short description of it. But we built like these multiple layers into these projects. It's about, for example, again, like the previous project, which is a very, more recent project, it's about tools. It's about how to interact with the physical medium that is more hands-on and less of clicking and dragging and commanding menus. It's about co-design, how we see as designers that we should be less focused on the end product and more focused on creating systems and frameworks in which the consumer or the client can co-design with you. So what comes out of it clearly carries our fingerprint as designers, because we designed the machine, we designed the tool, we designed the limitations of it, but all the objects are of course designed also by others. The final design is not made by us. And this creates this kind of family of shapes that all share this similar fingerprint, but that are all different. So there's lots of different narratives that interweave in these projects, and therefore what I said with the second meaning of to unfold, to gradually reveal to the understanding. Most of our installations are very easy to get into, but have this kind of multiple layers that you can start to rediscover the more that you look at it. To show a little bit the work, most of the work that people know us from is our autonomous work. So that is work that is commissioned by design biennials, by musea, by galleries. And of course, next to that, we also have a practice that is very much focused on two levels, which is the micro level, being very hands-on, and the macro level, which is more about thinking about design. And for example, we write a lot. We've made a book on 3D printing. It's in the library, I think, here. talking about all the implications of 3D printing in the creative industries, architecture, design, art, but we also write texts about design for things like Vitra Design Museum. We also design and curate exhibitions. This we did not curate, it's about the French empirical period. But especially exhibitions where digital storytelling and physical design kind of intersect. So we design this kind of very poetic non-computer interfaces to the topics that are on display in a museum, in an exhibition. And we also work for other designers, artists to develop anything that intersects with digital and physical. So we develop a lot of tools in-house, a lot of machines, and then we apply also that knowledge for other artists and designers. Today, I want to talk about a theme that over the last 3 years become more and more important in our work. We give a lot of talks, and with each talk you think about what are you actually doing, and you try to construct a narrative around it. And after adding and adding and adding work to it, you figure out that that doesn't always work anymore, and you start to reflect on what you're actually doing. And this is something that more recently started to appear in our work. And a lot of our work is about control. And it's about both reclaiming, so taking control, and about relinquishing, giving away control. What do I mean with that? I want to start with reclaiming control. A lot of our older work, things like l'artisan électronique, of instruments and archetypes, they deal with this question about who are we as a designer. Claire and I are studied at Design Academy in Eindhoven, which was formerly called Industrial Design, which in the name already says it's designed for the industry. But when you look at the history of the designer, it starts with the craftsman or craftswoman, and it's a profession where one person or one studio kind of understands this whole process. Designing, making, selling, everything is combined in one person or in one local studio. So the whole process, from an idea to the design, to the making, to the selling, all happens in kind of the same place. Of course, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, that kind of holistic profession was cut. Everything was being separated from each other. You had the factory worker who made it, you had the engineer who translated the ideas to products that you could make in the factory, you had the manager, you had the salesperson, you had the marketing people, and what was left was given to the designer, the one who makes the design. Literally in English, design means drawing. So it was the one who made the drawing. And so a lot of this kind of influence on the final product was of course lost, because a lot of people were there to bring in their own ideas and to also have a lot of reasons to say no to a certain design. And that's what you see a lot in industrial design. Most people working for the industry, 99% of what they come up with and develop is never actually produced, because there's so many people who can say no to something. What we see today, or in the last 10, 15 years, is that a lot of designers are taking more and more of this lost territory back in their own hands. The self-producing designer is a trend that you have seen developing in the last 10 years that's becoming really big, where designers are developing their own production methods, their own factories, and really starting to self-produce and self-market their designs. And why do we see that trend happening is for us because of digital tools. First of all, the internet gave us the methods to promote our own work. In the 80s, in the 70s, you were dependent on exhibitions and magazines to promote your work and to show your work. Today, we can all build a website, we can all set up an Instagram, we can all have our own voice. You all know Justin Bieber. He didn't become popular because he had a record label, but because he had a YouTube channel. So that's one part, but also digital production tools. Things like robot arms, 3D printers allow us to kind of self-produce, and also things like crowdfunding, Kickstarter allow you to finance your own kind of production. So we see with this kind of, it's kind of taking industry and reducing it to the scale of an individual design studio. So taking aspects of this pre-industrial craft economy, small-scale localized finance and production, and combining it with industrial tools. We're not interested in craft because we like basket weaving or throwing pots on a wheel or weaving. We're interested in what the industrial age brought as tools, but we're rejecting kind of the economical model that fits to that. Over the years, after l'artisan électronique, we also started to further develop the kind of the tools. So what you see here is a much more specialized and perfected version of the ceramic 3D printer that really allows for this kind of super fine layer control. We developed lots of new tools also to control the geometry, to explore kind of a new language for this machine. So if you look at l'artisan électronique, where we create traditional pots, traditional ceramic vases, actually, it's a narrative that works well in a museum where you have a pottery wheel and you create a vase. Everybody understands this. But when you look at the machine, you see actually that creating a traditional vase is really difficult. And some of you have already experienced this. But if you build something from a very thin wall, it can easily collapse on itself because it's soft clay and there's no kind of support. And you print quite thin layers. Brancusi said you cannot make what you want to make, but what the material permits you to make. You cannot make out of wood what you need to make out of stone, and you cannot make out of stone what you need to make out of wood. So this for us was kind of this realization that, and always our interest in this machine was to explore what the machine wants to do. Not the traditional design process where you have an idea and then you find the machine that wants to do it. We first develop a machine and then we want to see what the machine wants to do. So we started to explore this kind of geometries where it's not a thin-walled object, but the support that supports the object is integrated in the object. So we started to look, for example, at Gothic architecture, where you see you have very thin walls in the Gothic era, but there was not enough, there was no concrete or reinforced steel to support the thin walls, so they added these flying buttresses to support the geometry. So we started doing this similarly in this range of experiments and objects where we integrate the structure into the object and create this kind of native language or a natural language for this machine. This is an example of a project we did for Aesop where we applied the ceramic 3D printing and this type of very complex geometries in a commercial product. So this is a perfume diffuser for Aesop, an Australian skincare manufacturer or brand. And what we did here is use this kind of complex geometries that have a function in the objects because it makes it easier to print. But because they are so complex, they create a lot of surface area, and a lot of surface area create a lot of diffusion for a perfume. So the idea is that a perfume is absorbed into the porous ceramics, and because you have all this extra surface area because of this complex geometry, you get a lot of diffusion of the perfume. So it's a set of river stones that we 3D scanned, cut into, and then created this kind of other world inside, which is a lot more geometrical and a lot more strict. So that's about reclaiming control. So we're interested in this idea of what we have lost as industrial designers, that we are reclaiming some of that territory and bringing it back into our own studio. So from financing to distribution to manufacturing. So taking this whole kind of process back into our own hands and having a lot more influence and a lot more fresh ideas because we have this kind of reclaimed influence. When I talk about relinquishing design, so giving away control, I think you see it already in l'artisan électronique, where we're not actually designing the final object, but letting the end user or the gallery visitor designing the actual final products. We give away control, right? But also in 2009, I think this project kind of shows where the two kind of merge together. So in 2009, we started to develop the first ceramic 3D printer, and we immediately open sourced everything. So this is the first design of a little tool that I made, which is the same as what do you call that, frosting. When you put frosting on a cupcake, you extrude the sugar from a bag and you draw a nice little heart on top of the cupcake. This is the same, you put the clay in the syringe, you put air pressure on it and it comes out. So we open sourced, we published all the plans for this online and for others to kind of adapt, to improve, to hack, to change, or just to copy and use themselves. So one of the first to pick up this design was Jonathan Keep, a ceramist from the UK, who was interested in designs or shapes that he could generate on the computer. For example, in the background you see these objects that are generated by sound, by music or spoken words, sound waves that he converts to 3D models. But as a traditional ceramist, he was struggling with how to get from the screen, a geometry there, to his clay, which was sitting next to him in the workshop. So the 3D printer for ceramics really fit nicely in between the digital, the screen, the digital data, and the physicality of the clay. We have, together with Jonathan, we created this community called Make Your Own Ceramic 3D Printer. By now it has over 3,000 members. It's all people kind of interested in improving or adapting or modifying the technique. We exchange ideas, we exchange designs for tools. There's also a lot of people, there's ceramists there, there's designers there, architects, technologists, programmers. There's also, it's far beyond actually clay. There's also people interested in food printing. There's kind of a lot of people, surprisingly, from universities interested in printing biological materials, cells, and things like that. So sometimes I see designs that we created for clay and I see them being used in cell printing to print like bone tissue or skin tissue. The project Stratigraphic Manufactory originated from this community. This is a map of where, it's already an old map, where everybody is located. So these are all places around the world where people set up their own ceramic 3D printers. Pamplona is still missing. But these are all kind of small-scale, local ceramic 3D printing manufacturing hubs. And we thought, okay, what if we combine all of these together into a factory? So instead of the idea of mass manufacturing in China and then shipping all those products around the world, what if we only ship the design, which is a digital file, so it's not shipping, it's emailing. We ship it around the world and we produce the design where it's actually being used or where it's being sold. There was a nice quote from Adrian Bauer. He's the professor that made the first open source 3D printer. He said, he gave a nice analogy for this idea, which is it's easier to ship recipes than it is to ship a cake. When you need to ship a cake from here to Latin America, it will not survive. But you can ship a recipe, and then they can recreate the cake using the local flour, the local oil, etc. And you will get a similar cake, but of course slightly different. Maybe more or less sugar based on the local taste, bigger or smaller, local fruits instead of the fruits from Spain, etc. So what we did is we took this set of digital designs, it's a very simple set, and emailed them around the world to all these different manufacturers and asked them to make a copy of this set. And the instructions were not to touch the digital files, so please do not add an ear where there's no ear, but they were free to use whatever local clay they wanted, whatever glaze they wanted, and also something kind of technical like the slicing. When you go from a 3D model to a print file, you need to slice it, cut it in layers. So there also you can already decide some parameters like the thickness of the layers and the lines. So this is that set made by Jonathan Keep, the guy you saw in an earlier picture. And he used porcelain clay in England, in Cornwall. You still have a lot of porcelain. Then with a Korean, actually, traditional Korean glaze called the celadon. And what our interest also here is this kind of diversity. If you look at Jonathan's work, it's not only about the local material, it's also about the skills of the maker. And in traditional industrial processes, the maker is being taken out of the whole design process. The one who makes has actually no influence. It's the mold, everything should be standardized and everything should be identical. What we want to show is that even in a digital process, even in 3D printing, you can show the identity of the maker. So Jonathan is he's a trained ceramist, he's very meticulous, so very precise. He takes a lot of care in creating his clay and in finishing it and in glazing it. And so you have these very kind of precise models. This, on the other hand, is from Mustafa Kanyert. He's from Istanbul, Turkey. And there you see that ceramists, it's less of an art practice and more still a real kind of manufacturing. So Mustafa, for example, makes tiles and objects for mosques and hotels, etc. So there's a lot more kind of speed in the production, but also there's this kind of more locally appreciated aesthetic of less perfection and thicker glazes. So he used the terracotta clay, and the mixing of the clay was much less universal throughout the syringe. And so you get these differences in patterns. You see on top still the digital 3D model, but then at the bottom that disappears in kind of the pattern of the printing. There's a thick glaze on the inside that hides all the print lines. And what's also nice about all these different materials is that different clays, like a porcelain, shrinks more than a terracotta clay. So also the scale of the objects changes with the decisions made. This is from a group that we worked with in Taiwan, where you see something which we called toothpaste printing. You all know Colgate, the toothpaste with the red lines. If you put two colors in one tube, they come out at the same time, but they, if here is red and here is white, if you print in this direction, the red is on top. If you print the other direction, the white is on top. So you get these patterns that always repeat and change throughout the object. And it's an aesthetic that became, that you see being used by multiple people in this community. For us, it's important to, sometimes people give us a critique and they say like, you ask more questions than you give answers. And for us, that's the biggest compliment you can get. Because for us, it's more important to ask questions and that everybody individually forms their own kind of opinion or answers. It's more important to ask a question when you didn't even know that was a question. So things like, what is the role of the hand in machine production? And sometimes we get this critique that everything we make kind of a computer game out of pottery, or that if something is not touched by the hand, that it lacks poetry, it's not craft. My first response to that is that a glass blower is never touching his hot glass. So there's always a tool between the hand and the matter that you're shaping. And whether that tool is very simple, like in glass blowing, sometimes it's a newspaper that is wet and that prevents your hands from burning. But you also have your assistant that you need to give instructions. And giving instructions to something is the same as what you do with a computer or a machine. You instruct it, you hope it follows the instructions, but you never know for sure that it's actually following that. And that's, I think, also an interesting kind of balance. But also, I want to take this quote: the work of craft is neither the design nor the individual artifact, it's the tradition of the production, the presence of many objects identical in their concept, but interchangeable in their use and unique in their execution. So craftsmanship is not really about kind of these traditional craft processes, but it's more about, for us, working at a personal scale and acting locally versus global in anonymous industrial production. This project, Stratigraphic Manufactory, where we worked with this network of producers, it was always a kind of a, let's say, an art project, something we presented in a museum. So these are some of the places that it was exhibited in, and where we always worked with local ceramists and then let them work in a little workshop in the museum. So in Turkey, Taiwan, we did it in Korea, New York, Britain. And so it was always kind of an exhibition project. But what we see lately is that we are actually starting to produce ourselves like in this system. So we're kind of a small design studio. When you visit our studio, you see typically like 2 to 5 people running around. So we don't really focus on ceramic 3D printing only. So it's just one of the things we do. So we're not really a factory of porcelain or ceramic ware. But sometimes we do like larger productions. For example, last year we were asked to do 300 of these cups, which we produced in the studio. It was for us also an interesting experiment to see what is needed to do serial production instead of these one-offs that we, or these very limited edition art objects that we make. And that was an interesting experiment to make 300 cups in your own studio. And then the month after, Audi, the car manufacturer from Germany, they asked us to make 1,200 cups. And so we don't want to be a factory, so what we did is outsource it. So we worked with our network, our open source network, and we found people that can actually produce this amount of cups. So we worked with Verbruggen in the Netherlands, who are mostly a manufacturer of machines, 3D printers for ceramic 3D printing. And they use their machines to do a serial production. So you see multiple cups being printed on the same machine. So each time it prints 5 or 6 cups, and you have 4 of these machines running at the same time. Also for them, it's an interesting experiment to kind of test their machines. So we produce 1,200 of these cups. So this kind of distributed manufacturing, this idea of not having everything in your own kind of hands and spreading it out over a network, is something that we feel in the 21st century as kind of a natural way to design and to manufacture. So we see our studio also as a networked studio. The core, the heart of it is small, but we work with a big network of makers, of programmers, of specialists. Another project that comes from this community that was influenced or inspired by the community is Transaction Project with Charlie Stern and a bunch of other ceramists and glassblowers. So in this project, what we did is use the ceramic 3D printing as a tool or as a support tool for glass blowing. So we print a series of objects and then blow the hot glass directly into the ceramics. It originated as an idea from Charlie, who was trained as a traditional glassblower, and who was interested in a process used by the Romans to create molds out of terracotta to blow glass in. It's a technique that is mostly lost since then. So he was interested in the question whether we could revitalize that kind of process. And also out of the idea that molds, traditional molds, take up a lot of space and they don't last very long. So what if we can have lots of digital molds and then make them physical only when you need them and then blow glass into it? It started out as a 4-week research project in the south of Sweden, where we really blew glass in kind of any shape that we had to test out different clays, different geometries. We managed to go really extreme with the glass and the ceramics. If you look at glass and ceramics, they have mostly the same ingredients, sand, silica sand. And so they're very, in a way, similar, but that also makes them very different. A simple thing, for example, glass shrinks when it cools down, ceramics shrinks when it heats up. So you always have this kind of incompatibilities. If you make it too hot, they will fuse together, they will melt together. So we had to play with a lot of parameters to find what the Romans already knew, of course, is how to combine it. So ceramics also doesn't like this, like going in and out of a 1,000-degree oven, but we found the right type of clays and geometries. What was also very interesting, I think, about this is how 3D printing allows you to iterate and to develop something very rapidly. So we discovered quite early on that the geometry of the object was also quite important for the survival of the object when you blow glass in it. So a form with a lot of kind of cavities and things that stick out when you blow the glass, it touches the shape, but then has some room to expand. When I go back to this shape, you see that when you blow it, the glass touches the inside corners, but then there's enough room for it to expand. If that would be a tight circle, it would immediately kind of collapse. So geometry was also an important factor. And in this project, what we did is we set up a little print shop inside of a glass blowing facility. You don't see it, but there is like a huge glass blowing area. And what this allowed us to do is to test the glass blowing, and then in the evening with some hip hop, Charlie is also a DJ, lots of hip hop actually. We started to immediately what we learned in the day, apply it in the evening, print out new shapes, dry them on top of the glass kilns. We had a little ceramic kiln so we could fire them, and the next day or the day after we could immediately blow in them again. If you look at the traditional process, if you need to make a mold for ceramics, you make it out of plaster, it needs to dry 2 weeks before you can cast in it, then there's this whole lengthy process. So each time the next step takes 3 weeks if you want to change something to a mold or to a ceramic cast. Here we can go really fast, and that's one of the benefits of 3D printing. So we created this whole set of, our interest quite soon changed from using it as a lost mold, because it felt like a shame to throw away the ceramics, to a process where we integrate the ceramics into the glass. Also because we were actually more successful than we thought. Like in the first experiments, we thought that a lot of the ceramics would always break and fall off and just be a mold. But we became actually very successful in not breaking the ceramics. So we thought it was a shame to throw it away, and we wanted to integrate it. So these are some examples of the glass and the ceramics combined. Is a movie. So we worked in 2 different places. The first 2 weeks was in Konstfack, the school in Stockholm. And the second was in Costa Boda, which is in the south of Sweden, in the forests, a super small town. There you have a lot of historical glass blowing industries, which of course are, because of the wood, the fuel for the kilns. And unfortunately, of course, a lot of that is going away, is dying out. So this is footage from the first kind of 2 weeks where you see like this more random testing of different things. things falling apart. What's maybe a nice anecdote is that the glassblower we worked in Boda is trained as an architect, and that was helpful because if you work with craftspeople, they typically don't like designers, and you think you're very close in profession, but they see it quite different because they see designers as those people that come with a design. Typically like a diagram or out of Rhino or AutoCAD with very precise measurements, with very tight tolerances, with impossible things to do. They see designers as those people that work in a 3D program, and glass for them is this texture that you drag from the top and you drop on it. So whether it's wood or glass and it's kind of true, a lot of designers forgot about materials. And see it as those squares on top of or at the bottom of their CAD program. So it takes a lot of massaging and a lot of talking and a lot of having beers in the evening to kind of get on a similar level. So to work with somebody that was trained originally as an architect means that you already have a kind of language to talk with each other. Because our interest is not in, we didn't come with any drawings or anything. We came just with a set of objects, and we asked the glassblower to also look at the object and to add their own interpretation of the ceramic object, and to give it their own kind of twist or to use their own skills and their own personality in the blowing. And the project also developed in such a way that we traveled around the world to work with glassblowers everywhere around the world, and each time it was the same, and it was for the glassblowers always a bit of a surprise because typically they're asked to do something exact or they're asked to do their own thing, but something in the middle where you come with an object and ask them to do what they want with it, like to give it their own interpretation. So here, for example, the glassblower used traditional Venetian cane work, which is a very complex technique to kind of play around with the lines and the diagonals in the 3D print. So really interpreting the shape and adding their own skills and their own practice to it. What does that say about control is that the glassblower sees a designer as this control freak, while at the same time we come with a plan where we have basically almost no control. So this is, for example, the last series that we made, which is all with ceramic designs not made by us and with glass not made by us or not produced by us. So how we see ourselves in this is more as kind of conductors. You have a whole orchestra and you conduct the orchestra and you let everyone kind of bring out the best of their own practice and their own skills and talents and bring it together in a diverse but coherent whole. The last project I want to talk about is Scafaldo, which is the most recent. Are there architects in the audience as well? Students? Only one? Okay. Well, it's design, but it touches on some architectural qualities, I think. It was a collaboration with Materialize. In Belgium, Materialize is one of the biggest 3D printing service providers. And the project was commissioned by Belgium is Design, which is the organization. Belgium is a complex country like Spain with lots of different communities and etc. And so there's only one kind of organization that supports design on a national level. And for the Milan Fair, they asked 10 designers to work together with a Belgian manufacturer to create a new product. And we decided to work with Materialize, which for us, for a lot of people was kind of this, yeah, of course Unfolds works with Materialize, 3D printing is logical. But for us, being these people that take everything in their own hands and that hack their own machines, it was very different to work with a very big industrial player. But what most people don't know, most people know Materialize as the company where you send your file and you get your print from the tiniest to the biggest. But it is actually a software company that creates all the software that the whole 3D printing industry uses to run their machines. And so we wanted to emphasize that aspect and not the 3D printing aspect. And we were intrigued by this aspect of the software, which is called support generation. You've seen in our work the processes which extrude a material. That's also how most of your printers here work. They extrude plastic, build the object layer by layer, but there's also processes that use layers of powder or selective stereolithography. In this case, what we use is where you have a bath of liquid resin, and with a laser you solidify the resin, and so you print an object, and the object stays inside of this bath. So you need, when you print something, you need to create a structure underneath. I'll first show this image. The blue is what you want to print. That's, for example, a headlight for a car and some other parts. And the gray is the structure that is generated by the software underneath, because if there would be no structure underneath that anchors the object to the bed, it would just float away in this bathtub of liquid resin. And what's interesting, for example, here, this is all printed at the same time, so you have a scale model of the Capitol in the US with that headlight from a car, with a frog, with some jewelry. So all these different parts are combined in the printer, and the support structure bridges over all the objects to bring everything together. And we were really intrigued by the aesthetic of that support structure. So this is designed by engineers. This is not meant to be beautiful. This is not meant to be intriguing. In fact, this is immediately thrown away after the printing. So it's removed, it's thrown in the trash, and then all the marks or where they touch each other, they're sanded out. So it's a bit also the thing everybody in 3D printing wants to not talk about. It's like the black sheep. It's thrown away. You actually want to avoid having it in the first place. But it's there, and it's beautiful, and it's not designed. And for us, it reminded us immediately about this neo-Gothic architectural architecture that you see throughout the industrial age. This work from Bernd and Hilla Becher, two photographers who documented the German industrial architectural landscape. And you see the same. You have a functional object on top, and then this very efficient support structure underneath that is not meant to be beautiful, but has this kind of super efficient, lightweight aesthetic to it. And of course it did influence, for example, Eiffel to create the Eiffel Tower. So this type of structures were also appreciated for their aesthetics in the industrial age. So what we did is we created a set of objects where we designed the top, input it in the software from Materialize, which would then create the support structure. So we designed objects that would trigger a certain kind of process that we did not have under control. So the software takes so many parameters like the age of the resin, the placing in the machine, that it always generates kind of new structures out of it. And there's always this kind of surprises. We made 200 iterations, 200 tests, and each time we thought we understood the process and we had control over it, but each time it would generate us a slightly different result. This is the machine. It's a really huge, it's called a Mammoth 3D printer that they use to print car bumpers or dashboards mostly, so really large objects. And we printed only the support, so not the actual object that you would normally print. The support structures are super fragile, so they don't really last long, especially in sunlight. They disappear quite fast. So what we did is cast them in bronze with Factum Arte. It's a company here in Spain, in Madrid, specialized in manufacturing art objects and also historical facsimils and reproductions, to give them like this strength. And then the original objects, the digital models that we had to trigger these processes, we created using traditional methods, so glass blowing or CNC milling for the table in wood. So we see this process as, and quite typical for the way we design, is where we don't really have this control, but we see it more as planting a little seed. If you plant the seed in your garden, it can become, you know that it's a tomato seed, so it will become a tomato plant. You know on average how high it will be and how it will look like, but you don't know exactly how many leaves, how many tomatoes, how big, etc. So this is also how we kind of design, where we more seed these processes and we let ourselves be surprised also by the results. So these are some details of the structures. When you cast them in bronze, they become like super strong. I can stand on one of these towers, so they can take at least, I don't weigh 100 kilos, but they can take at least 100 kilos each. So it's incredibly strong. This was a kind of a short and fast project, like we do often. And then after you start to reflect on what you do, and somehow for us it felt a bit strange to create an object in the computer to trigger this process, and you add some kind of randomness or some kind of difference to create a more surprising result, like the different heights in the table, in the tower. But then we thought, okay, what if we just take an existing or an object that you don't control in the computer and use that as an input for the process. So we worked with Liam Reeves in London as a glassblower, and he's specialized in something that looks really simple, but to create amorphous shapes in glass. And it's actually quite hard to do. By twisting the glass when it's still hot, you create this kind of amorphous shapes. We paint the glass white, we 3D scan it, load it in the computer to trigger the support structures. You immediately see this kind of more variation in it. Then of course we take the paint off the glass and we add a little LED fixture and place the glass on top of the support structure. So it's like really this, almost like a glove, a well-fitting glove, how it kind of fits on the support structures. I want to end, you're all students, and I want to end with this image, or two images. This is, it's written under it, it's the first case of a computer bug. You all know a computer bug. You have encountered it probably multiple times. If you use Windows and it becomes blue, well, that's a computer bug. The first computer bug was an actual bug, like a little animal. And that bug, it's from the 1960s, I think. I don't have the date here. But when a computer was still full of these switches. So in the US, there was a big computer emulating the first atomic bomb explosions. And it was made of all these physical switches. And a bug got in the switch, and the switch couldn't compute anymore. So it gave an error in the program, and they glued the bug that they found in the relay. It's a moth. They taped it in their logbook, and first actual case of a bug. And so since then, a problem in the computer is called a bug. But what it shows for me is something we all forget. It's that computers are actually machines that you can, that are, so this was this first computer, that you can, today they are like this sterile aluminium slabs with glass on it. You cannot open them. It doesn't feel like a bug can actually get stuck in there. But we should not forget that these are machines that you can actually intervene in, that they have a physicality, that you can actually hack them and reprogram them. And I think as young designers, it's very important to not look at these devices as something that is made in California or designed in California, made in China, and lands on your desk as it is, and something that you have to take for what it is, and the software you have to take for what it is. No, these are all devices that you can bend to your own creative will, and you can interface with them and create kind of new aesthetics and new languages and new machines with them. So that's a bit the conclusion that I want to give to all of you. Don't look at these as closed objects. Look at them as a bicycle for your mind that you can use to get to a point in the distant future. All right, thanks a lot. If there are questions on a Monday morning, you can shoot. You can also find me in the next days to grab me. Sometimes the next morning you're like, that doesn't make sense, or that makes a lot of sense. And so grab me, talk to me, or shoot now.